made him famous. That's all coming up. But we begin tonight with the Republican Party refusing to take yes for an answer. After months of demanding that President Obama open up the health reform talks, invite the Republicans in, make it bipartisan, Republicans have gotten what they wanted. They've been invited to the White House for a bipartisan health summit next week. And it turns out they are super bummed about that.
Obviously, it's pointless to talk because they've made up their mind and they're going to ram it through, whether we like it or whether the American people like it.
That was the number 2 Republican in the United States Senate, Jon Kyl of Arizona, who has spent much of the past month blasting President Obama and Democrats for engaging in a, quote, go-it-alone approach, behind closed doors and out of sight from the public. Well, now that the president has said okay to Jon Kyl, we'll open up the doors, let's do this in full sight of the public, Jon Kyl's other face is against it. Jon Kyl is now against the thing he has been demanding for a month. Senator Kyl is finding that being two-faced, being a hypocrite on this issue, is actually not a very lonely place to be. Many of Senator Kyl's fellow Republicans are now trashing the very invitation that they spent months asking for. Exhibit A, John Boehner.
There has been no attempt, not one attempt, by the administration or the Democrats in Congress to actually sit down and work with us.
Okay, that's argument from John Boehner, face 1. Here's the argument from John Boehner, face 2.
I don't want to walk into to some setup. I don't know who's going to be there. I don't know how big the room's going to be. I don't know what the setup's going to be.
I don't know how big the room's going to be. How big? John Boehner's second face has also been articulating Republicans' specific concern that the healthcare bipartisan summit will be televised.
You know, is this a political event or is this going to be a real conversation?
The concern is, of course, that it will be hard to have an honest conversation about the real issues when there are TV cameras everywhere. I think that is a reasonable concern. But John Boehner's other face begs to differ.
The president, during the campaign last year, said that when we got to this part of the process, that it'd be a big open room and he'd invite the C-SPAN cameras in so the American people could see how this bill was coming together. I do think it's time to let the American people see what's going on.
Republicans have been hammering President Obama for not holding televised negotiations on health care. And now that he wants to hold televised negotiations on health care, they're against it. If this feels like a familiar dynamic to you, you are guilty of paying attention to recent events in American politics. Even suddenly retiring Senator Evan Bayh today called out this outbreak of hypocrisy.
2 weeks ago, the Senate voted down a bipartisan commission to deal with one of the greatest threats facing our nation, our exploding deficits and debt. The measure would have passed, but 7 members who endorsed the idea actually co-sponsored the legislation, instead voted no for short-term political reasons.
We will have much more on Senator Bayh's retirement later in the show. The chair of the Indiana Democratic Party is going to be here. But what Senator Bayh was pointing to there was that 7 Republican senators were for a bipartisan deficit commission until President Obama said he supported that same idea. The 7 then voted against it. Among them, Arizona Senator John McCain. Same thing happened when the Senate voted on a pay-go bill. 4 Republicans who had been fierce supporters of a pay-go rule after President Obama endorsed it ended up voting against it, against their own position. Among them, again, Arizona Senator John McCain. In addition to pay-go and the Deficit Commission, Senator McCain is also now against the same sort of climate change legislation he once supported. He also now opposes the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, even though he said he would reconsider it once military leaders were for it, which they are. Senator McCain also now opposes the very same immigration reform legislation he once co-sponsored. Senator McCain, I'd like to introduce you to Senator McCain. I don't think you two guys are going to like each other very much. We keep talking about political hypocrisy on this show for 2 reasons. First, someone ought to. Even if politicians are not capable of feeling shame and embarrassment for raw hypocrisy, we in the media, I think, owe it to the country to at least make clear that politicians ought to feel ashamed and embarrassed about it. And second, it seems important to make clear that politicians who are willing to take 2 totally opposite positions on the same policy, those politicians should not be taken seriously when it comes to policy. If you're for pay-go until the president is and then you're against it, then I don't really care what you think about pay-go anymore, because it's clear that you really don't care either. No one should bother engaging with policy hypocrites on policy, because by their very hypocrisy, they prove that they do not care about policy. I mean, you in your district, just this week you were at a community college touting a $350,000 green technology education program, talking about how great that was going to be for your district. You voted against the bill that created that grant. And so that's happening a lot, with Republicans sort of taking credit for things that Democratic bills do, and then Republicans simultaneously touting their votes against them and trashing them. That's, I think, a problem that needs to be resolved within your caucus, because, I mean, you seem like a very nice person, but that's a very hypocritical stance to take.
Well, Rachel, with all due respect, I can assure you Republicans were not consulted on the stimulus bill.
Whether or not House Republicans felt adequately consulted on the stimulus bill, that's not the point. They all voted no on it, every single one of them. And that's fine. You can be against the stimulus and not think it's going to work and not going to create jobs. You can also be for the stimulus. You can think it's going to work and create jobs. But you cannot be both against it and for it at the same time, unless you are a hypocrite. You cannot denounce it as creating no jobs and then claim that it's creating lots of valuable jobs at the same time. Or you're a hypocrite. I meant it when I said on Meet the Press yesterday morning that Congressman Schock seems like a very nice person. He does. I also meant it about the hypocrisy. And it's not just the $350,000 green technology education grant that he took credit for at home after voting against the bill that funded it. Congressman Schock's hometown paper also noted that he voted against the bill that funded a $400,000 upgrade for police radios and cameras in East Peoria. His vote against that funding did not stop the congressman from, yes, taking credit for it and from handing over the grant funding during an event in his district. Now, look, again, you can be for the president's policies. You can think they're going to work and be good for your constituents. You can also be against those policies and not think they're going to work, not think they're going to be good for your constituents. But you cannot be against those policies and for those policies at the same time unless you are a hypocrite. You can be for a deficit commission. You could be against a deficit commission. You cannot be a person who is both for and against a deficit commission, depending on who proposes it, unless you are a hypocrite. You can be for health reform negotiations being broadcast on television, or you can be opposed to health reform negotiations being broadcast on television. But you cannot simultaneously hold both of those positions unless you are a hypocrite. I will admit to being as cynical as anyone about politics and politicians. But even I am not so cynical that I don't think rank, two-faced, I believe it now I don't believe it, hypocrisy shouldn't at least be embarrassing.